There are hardly any standalone fantasy movies that are really worth watching. Most of the time when there's a standalone fantasy movie, it's because it was meant to be the first in a trilogy or a franchise, but the movie tanked at the box office or with critics and audiences, so future plans were scrapped. Now, there's a few occasions where I actually like some of these movies, like Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman, or even the Spiderwick Chronicles, despite that being a pretty bad adaptation. Or at least I remember my younger self being really disappointed with it because it wasn't like the book, but those books are also like 60 pages each. But there's hardly ever a fantasy film that is meant to be a single story, told from beginning to end in one film, and for that film to do that successfully. But that's the case with the 2007 film Stardust. Stardust has consistently slipped under the radar for years, mostly because it is such a standalone story. It also completely bombed at the box office, but it received high praise from both fans and critics. And I'm honestly surprised it bombed. It has Michelle Pfeiffer, Robert De Niro, Claire Danes, Charlie Cox as the leading man, though this was before Daredevil, Henry Cavill, although he's in like 2 or 3 scenes, Sir Ian McKellen, although he is just the narrator for like the beginning and the end. Alright, maybe this is starting to make more sense. But Stardust has consistently been a go-to movie of mine for years. If I had a letterbox, it would be in my top 4, and I think a lot of people either haven't heard of this movie or just let it completely slip from their mind, so allow me to bring it back in. If you haven't seen Stardust, I highly encourage you to do so if you're a fan of all things fantasy. This video is going to have spoilers, and I definitely suggest you giving it a shot and then coming back to the video. But before I get into the video, I want to introduce the sponsor of the video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen to you and give you helpful and unbiased advice. Before I started going to therapy, I had difficulty trying to balance my priorities between work, family, social life, especially now that I'm out of college and life seems to be moving incredibly fast. I felt like there was no true option or anybody I could turn to advice on any topic without a bias, so I turned to therapy, and BetterHelp could do the same for you. First, you go to their site, you can use the link in the top of my description. From there, you answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you with a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. You'll be matched with a therapist, usually within 48 hours, so you can get started really quickly. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/typewriter or choose the Thrifty Typewriter during sign-up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. Thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Now, back to Stardust. So let's head over to the village of Wall, go on a quest for a falling star, and look out for the dreaded Captain Shakespeare as we head into the world of Stardust. This movie starts off with your typical fantasy narration/exposition, but hey, Ian McKellen is the movie's narrator, kinda evoking the same feelings and style of prologue from Lord of the Rings. We learn a bit about this world, and then we see the wall. No, not that wall, this wall, which is admittedly less exciting. We then meet Prince Caspian, going past the wall and walking through a circus full of strange things that have the graphic quality of something on the PS2. Caspian, Dunstan Thorne, meets a woman who wants him, and he's all for it. Then he leaves, and 9 months later, he's given a son. This intro does a great job at not throwing too much at you at once. With all kinds of fantasy, getting too much information at once can be very overwhelming, especially with a prologue. I brought up Lord of the Rings, so whenever I hear people say that they can't get into that series because they tried watching it as an adult and not a kid, I can kinda understand that, because that prologue does throw a lot of information at you all at once, and if you're not up to the experience and learning about the world, you can easily feel overwhelmed. But the prologue in Stardust explains just really what you need to know at the time. A magical kingdom that you can enter through the wall, a sorta unexpected twist because you think that Caspian is gonna be the protagonist, but everything good happens to him here, and then the twist of there being a son changes the perspective of the story. I think most noticeably with this intro is how it doesn't actually explain the title of Stardust at all just yet. We then meet Tristan Thorne, who wants the girl next door, but she's got eyes for Humphrey, and quite honestly, I can't blame her. Tristan gives her special treatment, loses his job over it, and overall just gets treated like trash by her. But he eventually takes her out on a date, and his awkwardness on this date is far too relatable, and I hate it. It's here that we switch stories with the help of our narrator, Sir Ian McKellen. Sir Ian McKellen does a great job at being the narrator and bringing us to different parts of the story in a very natural way, and I think his job and this story having a narrator really fits, because at the end of the day, this story is like a semi-adult oriented fairy tale. The closest comparison this movie draws is from The Princess Bride, which itself is like an adult fairy tale, and there's a lot of similarities in tone between the two films. No scene illustrates this better than when we meet the king and all of his sons. It really kind of sets the tone of the movie going forward. Septimus kills his brother by pushing him off the edge of the tower. His father laughs, then one of the other brothers goes to push Septimus off just to kind of play it off. Then the dead brother reunites with his other brothers in ghostly form, and they all kind of laugh about the situation they're in. This is not some sort of like ultra realistic fantasy tale, and the comedy really takes center stage a lot of the time. It can be really over the top at times, and then really subtle at other times. It won't be for everyone, but this movie consistently makes me laugh at some new joke or moment every time I watch it.
Nothing says romance like the gift of a kidnapped, injured woman.
This is also the inciting incident of the plot, because whoever finds the star is rewarded in all three storylines. We meet the witches, and they need the star because it'll make them younger again. Whichever of the brothers finds the star will become king, and if Tristan finds the star, he gets to marry Victoria. This is such an interesting and quick way for the story to unfold, and a great way to both introduce the storylines and the motivations of everyone involved. Everyone's motivation is the star, but they clearly have different reasons for wanting the star, and as the events of the story continue, these motivations start to hold a bit more weight behind them as they start to change. Speaking of witches, let's talk about Michelle Pfeiffer as Lamia. She has so much fun in this role throughout the entire film. Lamia is also just such a great and unpredictable character, and obviously because Michelle Pfeiffer plays her, she was given a much bigger role than Lamia had in the book. A lot of the magical abilities she uses leads to a lot of really great and unique moments, both in the film and just for fantasy movies in general. All of the magic is very well explained, either by conversation or by simply showing us. The scene with the runes is very well realized because of how Septimus explains it, but also makes for a great, ominous, and suspenseful scene. And this is just one of the many, many great suspenseful scenes that this movie has to offer. The music in this film is incredible. I really think the music is part of what drew me into this as a kid, and it was also the first movie soundtrack I remember actually buying and listening to in the CD player. Wow, that made me feel really old. The soundtrack was made by Ian Eshkari, which I may be pronouncing wrong, but it's unfortunate because it seems a lot of the stuff he's made has been for subpar fantasy movies, but he's a really great artist, and if soundtrack music is your thing, you should give it a listen. From here, the movie really has three storylines: the witches, the princes, and Tristan and Yvain the Star. I talked about how all their motivations are really great and make for a great story, but what elevates this movie even further is the crossover and how interconnected these stories are, even if they seem very different from each other at first glance. In the beginning, the slave of Ditchwater Sal says that she's a princess that's been cursed to live this life until Sal dies. We don't really think much of it at the time, but it goes on to have a very different meaning in the story. Later on, Tristan meets one of the princes on the road. Lamia comes into contact with Sal and her slave and curses her to be unable to see, hear, or touch the star, and all of these moments come back into the story later. The sequence at the inn is the first time that all of the storylines are brought together in one way or another. We also get an absolutely amazing performance from Arthur Weasley here, playing a human goat. Yes, you heard me correctly. This whole sequence is very suspenseful, and because there's the meeting of all the stories, there's so many different layers about things that could go wrong. Primus literally talks with Yvain, the music getting more and more intense as it goes on.
It's the largest in all of Stormhold, so they say.
How nice for you.
And the Ghost Brothers are yelling at him that the star is right there, and he realizes too late. All of this happens like 40 minutes into the film, but we're aware of all the characters and their intentions. This doesn't feel too quick. It feels fast for sure, but not in a bad way. The pacing of this story is just incredible. But it also makes the story have kind of a strange structure behind it. There's the prologue, the first act, meeting everybody and having them go for the star, then having them all meet just to escape, ending the second act, so we're at the third act for us to just be like an hour into the film. Or I guess you could look at it like it's Act 2 Part 1 and Part 2, but regardless, the pace of this movie does lead it to have a strange structure. After this, we meet the dreaded Captain Shakespeare and his gang of sky pirates who capture lightning both as a currency and a weapon. I think that's just such a great and cool concept in a fantasy movie, and I don't think that this movie wastes it per se. It's just a footnote in the overall storyline, but it's things like this that I enjoy about this really, really cool world. Robert De Niro plays such a menacing pirate. This is like Pirates of the Caribbean on crack, like what Euron Greyjoy should have been. Wait a minute. I truly cannot imagine the outrage that this movie would have if it came out now. Robert De Niro playing a gay pirate dressing up in drag? This movie is woke. We also meet Ricky Gervais's character, who I don't bother remembering the name of because he's literally just Ricky Gervais doing improv, so if you find him funny, you'll like this scene. If not, you probably won't, but again, it connects to the greater story because Ditchwater Sal tells them about the fallen star that if sold could mean retirement for all of them. We then get the Tristan becoming a hero montage, which I think is a good time to talk about Tristan Thorne as a character in general, and why he's one of my absolute favorite characters of all time. He starts out as the dorky kid with big dreams of traveling the world and wants to woo the pretty girl in town who doesn't really care about him at all. He leaves and goes on a big adventure and meets somebody who actually starts to care for him for who he is. Yvain has a line that really resonates with me personally.
There are shop boys, and there are boys who just happen to work in shops for the time being. And trust me, Tristan, you're no shop boy.
And this line has stuck with me for years, especially when I watched this movie in high school and was that kid with really, really big dreams. The part that makes this a fantasy story is how Yvain falls for Tristan after he learns to become a great warrior and dresses better and has long, luscious hair. I'm just missing those key 3 parts of my own journey, damn it. But also I think that Tristan is a fool for even considering going back to Victoria after meeting Claire Danes. But that just might be me. The fight on the pirate ship is really great. Good thing this guy who plays the Night King doesn't have the same powers in this story. The captain's men also don't think differently of him once they see him in his own quarters, because apparently they already knew who he was. Again, if this movie came out now, it would just be woke, but this is actually a really great moment in a movie that was really ahead of its time. The whole sequence that leads us to the true third act, or the fourth act, is again another example of how this movie does suspense very well. But first, we get to see Tristan and Yvain confess their love for one another, and an incredibly satisfying moment of Tristan denying Victoria and one-upping Henfrey. But the realization that she can't cross over the wall starts this incredible sequence of Tristan running to stop her, Lamia and Septimus approaching the wall, and Sal's slave going to stop Yvain from crossing the wall. When they all meet up, there's a confrontation, and the guard at the wall says he's done, he's retiring, which is very well warranted. Then we head to the final battle, Septimus and Tristan versus the witches. There's the nice reveal that Una was actually a captured princess, being Septimus' sister, and of course Tristan's mother. But Septimus' death, even though he's not a great dude in the story, his death is kinda messed up. A voodoo doll breaks his arm and legs, and then he gets drowned in the air. Nothing at all he can do about it. This movie is pretty light despite its darker elements, but this is honestly a messed up death scene. Tristan then has to fight the other witch by releasing all the animals. Again, kinda messed up, but after seeing how the witches treated the animals all movie, it's nice to see them get their revenge in what also must be a pretty gruesome scene because they don't even show it. Then he has to fight a kinda zombified voodoo version of Septimus, and I really like this fight. Just the idea of fighting somebody who's even more undead than a zombie and having to go after the master of the doll is a really unique sequence and fight scene. It's also a great wraparound for the PG-13 rating this movie has. In fact, the whole movie, there's never any blood. Even when there should be, it's just colored differently. Septimus even tells one of his men to clean his blade, but there's never any blood whatsoever. But having Tristan fight somebody who's already dead and not have to make it seem like he's actually fighting somebody to kill them changes up the stakes a little bit, but also holds true to the story they're telling, because he tells Yvain in another scene that he probably couldn't kill anyone. And this holds true because Tristan is defeated when he goes up against Lamia, but it seems that Lamia is just so broken after everything she cares about is gone, so she goes to let them leave, but then doesn't let them, just to, I don't know, toy around with them even more? I don't really understand this scene other than to just go for a moment of misdirection and show us some more PS2 CGI. She does say that the star isn't as great with a broken heart, so I guess this would have healed Yvain just a little bit, but this is really one of the only moments in the film that I'm kind of like, alright about. The ending and Tristan getting the stone that unveils him as the new King of Stormhold is a very, very fairy tale happy ending, complete with the two parents being together, and also the implication that Humphrey is cheating on Victoria with Captain Shakespeare, which is just hilarious, but also, wouldn't Tristan be a bastard in this case? How could that make him king? I guess there's just no alternative Stormhold heir, but the implications of this decision are kinda crazy. And then they live happily ever after, quite literally, forever. I love each and everything about this movie. I think that this is one of the few movies that has an absolute perfect script. All of the plot elements come together really well, and this is just a story that I have such a personal connection to. All of these themes resonate really strongly with me, and if you haven't seen this movie, even if you've watched this video, I highly recommend that you give it a watch. I do think that this is the most underrated fantasy film ever made, and for all the reasons that I explained, I'm giving Stardust a rating of a solid 10 out of 10. Have you seen Stardust? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Special thanks to all my channel members, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Yeah.